Recording is started. All right. Good morning. Welcome to the Assembly Enterprise Utility Oversight Committee of the Whole for June 18th, 2020, starting an unusual time at 10:40 a.m. Desiree, would you call the roll?
Yes. Ms. Allard. Mr. Constant.
Here.
Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Ms. Kennedy.
Here.
Ms. LaFrance.
Here.
Mr. Perez-Verdilla. Mr. Peterson. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Here.
Mr. Rivera. Mr. Weddleton. And Ms. Zalatel.
Here.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have a quorum, Mr. Chair. You might be muted, Mr. Constant.
Yeah, awesome. Then I was just going through the agenda briefly. We have an update from Solid Waste Services, AWW, Port of Alaska, and then I have a couple other items to add under other business. Are there any proposed changes to the agenda? Hearing none, we will proceed into the briefing by Solid Waste Services. Mark, Mr. Spofford, why don't you take it away? You also might be muted, Mark. Mark, are you there? Are you frozen?
Looks like he's frozen.
All right, why don't we go ahead with the Central Transfer Station construction update? Is there anyone prepared from Solid Waste to discuss that?
So this is Michael Rhodes, the manager of engineering and planning at Solid Waste. We're gonna give you guys a presentation today to discuss where we're at with the transfer station, how that project is progressing. Currently, we are at 65% design for the project as a whole. In the interim, we've put together an early site design package that we are looking to issue to our construction manager at risk who's under contract. That will be agenda item 10D9. So we just want to give you a summary of that, and then we also have a funding request associated with that project. But with that, I will pass it off to Chris Coleman from Tetra Tech, our design consultant.
Okay, good morning. Can you see my screen? I guess that's the first question. You should see a.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I just want to lead with that. So my name is Chris Coleman. I'm the project manager with Tetra Tech for the new Central Transfer Station design project. As far as our agenda today, I want to go over 4 things. One is we want to remind you of what a CMAR is and the benefits that they bring to the Central Transfer Station design projects. We have Jed Shandy here with Davis Constructors and Engineers, who is the CMAR on this particular project. And Jed's also going to talk about specifically what we're doing for this first work package. It's an early site package, and he'll go into the details on that. And then I want to switch gears a little bit and give you an update on the Anchorage Regional Landfill design project. We're doing a building replacement there. And then we're going to come back to CTS and revisit a discussion that came up back March of this year related to the feasibility associated with putting a waste-to-energy facility on the new CTS site. So I have Tom Ramsey here with Geosyntec, who's going to talk about the specifics associated with that study.
Mr. Coleman, before you proceed, I would just like to say for the record, Mr. Weddleton has joined us. Go ahead.
Before we get into the details, I always like to, anytime I give these update discussions, I try to remind everybody where we are with schedule. I think some of you might have seen this before. Right in the center of the screen is a green star, and each time I show this, that star keeps moving further and further to the right. And so we're quite excited how things are progressing with the design. We have a groundbreaking scheduled. We have July 9th ceremony, so we're right there. We're at summer 2020, getting ready to start construction, and we're looking at about 2 seasons of construction activity with the winter of 2020 of a handover to back to solid waste services. So that's the schedule that we're tracking, and right now things are in good order for that. So moving on, I want to now turn this over to Jed Shandy with Davis Constructors to talk about the CMAR process and what that is.
One more interruption. I just would note also Miss Allard is listening in the queue.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. So CMAR is the delivery method that Solid Waste Services has chosen for the project here, as opposed to a traditional design bid build or even a more modern design build approach. It means that Davis is going to be the construction manager, and we're at risk on this project. We'll provide management services like scheduling, site supervision, quality QA, QC, and any indirects such as material handling for the project overall. Those services will be provided on a T&M basis with a hard cap for a maximum dollar for contract certainty. And in conjunction with that, Davis will self-perform some limited scopes on the project, largely focused on schedule like concrete construction and structural framing that allow the other subcontractors to perform their work timely. This is an efficient allocation of project resources, and it allows us to shift budget around when we need to accommodate changes in the design scope. With that, we have been engaged since December of last year. I think you guys were aware that you let the contract out. So we have attended design meetings and provided value engineering and life cycle cost analysis to the design team as they progressed. We participate in those meetings weekly and help them select materials and methods to efficiently build what Solid Waste Services needs in a facility. Just want to highlight one of the main benefits we've achieved to date is the ability to bring in a pre-engineered metal building manufacturer to make sure that the large tipping buildings facility is going to fit the limited design requirements that meet a pre-engineered metal building, and highlight that has already saved the project 655 tons of steel based on a traditional steel structure that the engineers were looking at the time. So that equates to about $3 million in project savings before we even break ground. Now I'd like to just kind of highlight what is included in work package 1. Chris has got a drawing there on the screen. So the highlighted areas there are indicating surcharge. In the future, we'll be paving those areas, and it's important that time and weight are applied to those surface areas. So we want to get that done this year. Additionally, we're looking at doing some excavation and prepping for foundation. If the stars are in alignment, we hope to get some early concrete in on subsequent work packages and such that we can get a really early start next year and shave some more time off the project schedule. Does anybody have any questions on kind of what that scope is there?
Any questions out there? Hearing none, I do have one question. The pre-engineered metal building, where are those fabricated?
This one is Barco Pruden is the selected manufacturer. That's probably going to be manufactured in BC.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I'm going to go back to Solid Waste Services. Heidi Tomerson to talk about the future GMP appropriation. Heidi.
Thank you, Chris. As Chris said, this is Heidi Tomerson. I am the Finance Director for Solid Waste Services. And we just wanted to bring you up to date with where we are on the finances for the project right now. You will have, well, First of all, the Assembly has approved Ordinance 2018-76. It was approved back in October of 2018, allowing solid waste services to borrow up to $114,585,000 for this project and the associated land purchase. To date, about $34,862,000 has been appropriated. Solid Waste plans to break ground, as you heard, starting in July of 2020 and commence construction activities. And so as they're putting these work packages forward to you, we looked at things we need to facilitate our short construction season and enable the contractors and design contractors to make decisions and purchases, hopefully at intervals that allow us to obtain discounts and things like that. So you will see in the Assembly Agenda Item 10G10 a proposal to appropriate the remaining balance of the approved borrowing program at $79,723,000 to the project. At 35% design, our cost estimate was slightly higher than the amount we had included in our borrowing program. Looked like we might need $90.3 million for construction, which is about $5 to $10 million more than what we had originally expected. So at this point, this is just a heads up. We are appropriating the balance of what has already been approved, and we will continue the design process and working with construction managers and bring more to you when we know if there is an exact amount that we need over and above this. So that will be on your agenda for the upcoming Assembly meeting. Does anyone have any questions about the financing?
I don't see any. Wait just a minute. Anyone want to chime in?
Chris, Weddle.
Mr. Weddleton.
So the budget went up now that you're at 35% design. So is that typical at this early stage to know that? Would we get to 65% and expect to see more? And typically on these things, there's like, I think when we do the budget, we have a contingency in there of some amount, you know, in case of this growth. So would that be more than kind of the extra that we might have factored in?
Okay, I would like to defer to.
Chris, I hope I would.
Yeah, this is Mike Rhodes again. So on the $90.3 million budget, that falls somewhat just slightly higher than mid-range for our preliminary costs. We based our original ask on that mid-range. We're somewhere in between. Yeah, so right now we're just slightly higher than mid-range. It's definitely not uncommon to at 35% design, you know, based on just filtering through the needs of the department and, you know, efficiencies that we can find in some places. But you know, that original preliminary estimate was just I mean, we based that on just being able to occupy the site. We did not get into the details of where the building would go, how our traffic flow would would work at the site. You know, we had a general idea, but that, you know, that has gotten modified to improve operational efficiencies, you know, since then. And so that's where we're at with the design. We don't anticipate it to go up at 65. We're, you know, it's 90.3 is a solid number for the remainder of the project.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick sidebar question. Falsey, are you in the queue? Are you here anywhere?
I am not in the queue, but I am here.
I'm in the queue, but in the room. All right, thank you. Just want to make sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so we're gonna switch sites now and head to the landfill. I'm gonna give you a quick update on what we're doing there. This project differs from the CTS project in that we're doing a traditional design bid build. This is the replacement project due to the damage associated with the 2018 earthquake. And you see two floor plans in front of you. The bottom floor plan is the existing building now, and the top one is the proposed one that's currently under design. And in fact, today we as a design team, we just submitted the 35% design for that for SWS review. And the reason why it's a little bit bigger is it's part of the building codes have changed. In addition, the equipment is larger than what it was when it was originally designed. And so with that, there's best practices and egress requirements that's driving the building slightly bigger. We're being very mindful that this is a FEMA reimbursable project. And so our FEMA compliance team is making sure that we're staying within the rules of FEMA so that we are designing a building for SWS that can be reimbursable. And so we're not putting any bells or whistles on it that we feel like would not be reimbursed. But some of the improvements that the new proposed plan will have to the right side of the screen, we're improving life safety. There'll be new mechanical systems. We're adding a generator for the building. And frankly, it's just going to be larger to be able to accommodate the bigger vehicles. As of now, the way I understand it, to maintenance some of the vehicles, the doors have to be left open. So that this new design will address that. Now, as far as schedule, this is a fast track design. We want to, the goal is to get solid waste services in this building before winter 21. And so we're fast tracking the design. We hope to have the design complete by late summer, early fall, get the RFP for the contractor out and have them selected before the end of the year, so that as soon as the spring hits, we can break ground and start the foundations. So the last part of our agenda here is the waste to energy site considerations. I'm going to turn this over to Tom Ramsey, Tetra Tech, just to kind of quick set the setting for this. This was a concern that was brought up during our March briefing to you. We took that concern seriously. We hired Geosyntec to do a feasibility study, and they focused on 3 items there. And so I'm going to turn this over to Tom to get into those 3 topics, and we'll be able to take any questions. Tom?
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. My name is Tom Ramsey, the project manager. Work with Mark Rogoff on this, but I was managing this piece of it for the feasibility study for the potential of co-locating a waste to energy facility at this CTS site. So as you see on the slide, we looked at 3 things, and those 3 areas that we looked at for permitting, geotechnical, and just the ability to geometrically place the facility on the site all have major considerations with regard to the overall cost of building a waste to energy facility at this location as opposed to constructing it at another location, and then also just with the overall operations efficiency that would be for the municipality once the whole thing is put together. So essentially, I'll cut to the chase real quickly, and then we can go through the specific things. But we essentially saw some difficulties with feasibility, as I'll go through. Go ahead, Chris. We can move forward to the next one. The main one that we looked at, first part was regarding the feasibility review. Waste to energy plants are quite intensive from a permitting standpoint because of the emissions issues associated with waste to energy, in addition to just being a major civil infrastructure. The issue that we've got with a waste energy plant, you've got to have a smokestack that is at a height that is at a requirement that's high enough in order to provide dispersion that's necessary for what, waste energy plants have very extensive emissions control equipment, but they're not zero emission facilities. And so you've got to have a stack at a specific height in order to meet dispersion requirements. That stack for this facility would be over 200 feet in height. And that's a problem, given the fact that the property is in less than 3 miles from Ted Stevens Airport, and is in the direct line of the runway for Ted Stevens. So the issue that would come with that is we would be required to get FAA approval, a review and approval for that stack. And it's not to say that it would be impossible to permit, but it would certainly come under quite intense scrutiny, having a stack that's that high. So there's that, plus a number of just other zoning and other issues that would have to be addressed. Second finding is related to the conditions that were already mentioned earlier today with regard to the subsurface of the site. We've got some tricky conditions out there with peat and high groundwater. And the particulars of a waste energy facility, as you imagine, you've got a very tall smokestack that's got a specialty foundation. There's also a very deep pit that has to be constructed as part of it. That's a charging pit where there's several days where the waste is essentially stored so that the facility can operate through weekends and holidays and whatnot. And that pit is 30 feet into the ground, which causes some pretty heavy duty geotechnical conditions. And then the facility needs a fair amount of water. Since we'd be generating electricity, there's a steam-based electric component in there. So you'd have some fairly large water storage tanks on site as well. And again, given foundation conditions, we'd be pushing ourselves into some specialty foundations that would not be needed otherwise. So the net of all those things together would result in a cost of about $20 million more to locate the waste energy facility at this site, as opposed to putting it somewhere else where you didn't have these particular difficulties. And then the final thing is a waste energy plant needs a pretty big footprint. You've got a large facility for loading the waste in. You've got boilers and turbines, emission control equipment. And then because the disposal location is remote from this, we would then have to have a warm storage area for ash that would have to be large enough to manage a number of days worth of ash, because you can imagine you might have a circumstance where you've got a holiday or a very bad storm event or something that results in the inability to take ash off site for a number of days. So you have to have a fairly large amount of storage on site for that ash. And as a result of all that, we can't really squeeze all of those, all that infrastructure on the existing CTS site without having to kick a few things off site, primarily the maintenance, the truck maintenance and storage areas that would be needed for city operations. So the importance of the benefit and the efficiency gain from consolidating all of the solid waste services operations onto a single site would then be lost at that point. So in a nutshell, to kind of combine all those things together at the end of the day with regard to feasibility, our conclusion is essentially that that there's really not a cost or administrative benefit to the municipality for co-locating the waste energy plant at this site. So we would not recommend doing it. That's the quick nutshell. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Are there any questions from the members?
Chris Weddleton here.
Yep, go ahead.
So if not at the central transfer station, then where?
Our take, and Mark, you can speak to this as well from your experience with many other facilities, but the most efficient place to put it would be at the landfill site. It provides some benefits from the standpoint of getting the ash from the facility to the landfill can then be done with off-road trucks that are really independent of weather at that point, and it reduces the infrastructure that's needed at the facility as well, because the incoming traffic essentially dumps directly into that large waste holding pit. Mark, is there anything else you want to share with that?
No. Most of the most of the plants that we seem to tour, and the ones that I'm familiar with, will have a joint waste energy plant and landfill co-located on the same site. So that the question comes up whether or not it's feasible to site one of these at the existing Anchorage landfill. We have not viewed that yet.
But yeah, hey, this is Spafford, John. Yeah, I mean, kind of the logical, like what Dr. Rogoff just alluded to, the logical next spot or intuitive spot would be at the landfill. But short of doing an extensive site selection study that'll look at all of the different options that are available within the municipality of Anchorage, as well as even potentially outside of the municipality. Say if you have somebody like Matt Sue, who's looking at something like this, where we could, co-locate something like this. We just don't have a good idea about what that is. But my gut would tell me, based off of the sites that I know that are out there and what I've seen from the tours that I took, that the landfill would be the kind of the next best place to look.
Can I follow up, Chris, or I see Megan?
Go ahead.
So I guess a couple of things that are, were there operating cost savings by being at the central transfer station that would overwhelm that 20 million over time? And will you do a full site selection study?
Well, to answer that, we did look at the major operational issues that you've got are the way, it's essentially hauling the materials that are going out there. So what you're talking about doing now is by co-locating the facility, you're hauling out ash instead of hauling out the unburnt materials out to the facility. You get about a 50% reduction in weight from ash on there, so you'd reduce the total amount of hauling by about 50%. We did not do a specific look at what the time period on that would be because it's very dependent on where the waste energy facility where the waste energy facility plant would be located. But my first reaction to that would be that over the life of the facility, you'd be looking at probably something on the order of a break even between the two. So I don't see a large financial benefit in operations in going in one over the other.
And then John, this is Spafford. Like I just said, we're, if and when we do get to the point where we're going to take the next step towards looking at waste to energy, a comprehensive site selection study on all the different sites that are available within the municipality will be done.
Very good. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mark, can you remind me where we're at in the waste to energy process? So we've kind of ruled this one out just because we were looking at breaking ground on the central transfer station. So what step are we at?
We're basically, the ball is in my court to be able to tell you, the assembly, basically, this is the overall life cycle costs of the different options the different disposal options that are available, such as, continuing on the path we're on now, status quo versus enhanced recycling versus all the way at the other end doing something like waste to energy and what that present value basically would be. And then the next step that we have to do is complete the analysis to show, okay, well, if you guys did say, okay, take the next step with respect to looking at waste to energy, here's what the budget impacts are going to be to solid waste services, over the years to come, to give everybody a better idea about what the impact will be to our rates. And so we're almost done with those last two items, and I hope to present those here in the very near future.
May I ask a quick follow-up?
Please.
Okay, thank you. Does the operations, are we able to model or know well enough what the operations of the new and improved central transfer station will do to make sure we're taking into account that change as we look forward?
Yeah, part of, I guess what you're getting at is if we do a lot better with recycling or diverting materials from the landfill. So one of the key assumptions that's included within the new long-range financial plan that we're developing is to look at stuff like that. For instance, if we change from, we've consistently deposited 300,000 and some change plus tons into the landfill every year. If we were to do a 20% better job of diverting material from that, it'll model what those changes in costs are going to be, as well as those changes in volumes and stuff like that to help us spit out, what the overall economic impact will be. If that makes sense, Meg.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you.
Other questions? All right, hearing none, let's proceed. Is there more for your presentation, or is that it?
No, that concluded the presentation.
All right. Very good. We heard a request from Mark then to sometime in the very near future schedule a briefing on this topic, and we will continue this conversation. And also, we're now going to switch over to AWW. Is Mark around, Mr. Costantino?
Yes, I am here, Chris. This is Mark Costantino, the General Manager of Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility.
Go ahead and take over.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So today, I'm going to be very brief because there's a couple things that have occurred. So right now, we've got what you'll see on the subject line is the AWU Seacliff Water Main Extension. So we'll talk about that briefly because there's two action items before the assembly on July 14th. And so what we want to do, what was scheduled is we are going to actually do an assembly work session that is scheduled for July 10th. And I wasn't sure how much time I'd have based on the solid waste information, and I also wanted it to be closer to the assembly meeting so it was more fresh in everyone's mind. So there will be an assembly work session on July 10th for everyone that will talk about the following things: the Sandhill Reserve private development, the infrastructure coordination agreement, the Seacliff Street capital project, assessments, levee pond connections, and the future improvement districts. As you see, by all that information I just told you, this is a multifaceted project that really the big purpose is to get clean, reliable, potable water to an unserved area of the community that has arsenic and nitrate problems. It's successful. It's a very good project, but I want to get you all the information closer to the assembly meeting because there's two specific action items the assembly needs to take action on, and that will be the AM 29720, which is the House Bill 380 levy upon connection process. And the construction project for that water main has been a bid. The bids came in really well, and we want to get that awarded at that assembly meeting on July 14th. So stay tuned for that. And then the other thing we'll give you an update on that same work session on July 10th is a brief update on where we're at with the stormwater utility, because we're going to actually also have an assembly action item for that is we will be proposing to award the contract to take the stormwater utility to the next step for the consultant to do the rate study, the public involvement, and the other information that needs to get done. That's all I've got.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance, are you in the queue? Or not in the queue, in the meeting? Are you back?
Yes, I am, Mr. Chair.
I am hoping you are still interested in running herd over the stormwater conversation.
Yes, I would be happy to.
So I would, if you can, have you meet with Mark on the phone or however you guys do to get a basic framework for how that conversation will be coming forward.
Sure, will do.
Thank you very much. So any other questions for Mark on the topics that he just briefly presented to us? Okay, I don't hear any, and just for my purposes, I would make an early disclosure that, as you all know, I do have a real estate license. It's in referral status, which means I'm not actively conducting real estate, but continue to maintain a license. And the brokerage that I hold that license at is owned by the developer of the Sandhill development. And so I will be walking very carefully through that part of the conversation. I believe that the water main is separate but connected, and so we'll be having a more thoughtful conversation about potential conflicts coming up as this item moves closer to action. So other than that, then we're going to move on. Mr. Falsey, are you still available?
I am, Mr. Chair.
So the agenda item that is already published, I'm hoping you can give for us, is just a brief update again on the Port of Alaska. There might be a few questions.
Yes, I've asked Sharon Walsh and Jeff Bull to join the meeting today because we do have some construction updates, and if there are no immediate questions for me, we'll hand the baton to those two folks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Chair, this is Sharon.
Go ahead.
Sharon Walsh, the Modernization Program Director, and we are pretty happy with the PCT 2020 construction so far. We're 66% complete with installing trestle piles, 25% complete with installing platform piles. You can see some of the action on our website. We have an active construction camera going on there. The contractor is generally on schedule, especially considering the COVID-19 impacts. There was, some delay getting started, as anyone would expect, as things were getting loaded out in Seattle in, March and April. But he's making good progress, and we're hopeful that they'll actually pick up the time that they lost there. But it's looking pretty good. In July, they should be complete with all of the pile driving of the permanent piles, and they'll be installing reinforced cast-in-place concrete cores inside the piles. Basically, they drop a rebar cage in there and then fill with concrete to a certain level. In August and October, we'll be installing the precast cast-in-place concrete deck panels, and they are being manufactured in British Columbia, but they are in accordance with the Buy American Act, and they are just about 80% complete with those, and they'll be loading them on a barge and on their way up to us in July. We've had 2 instances of a marine mammal shutdown, meaning we saw belugas and had to stop work until they were out of the area of risk, and but both of those were short, less than an hour, and July is a fairly minimum risk period for the belugas. They usually don't show back up in our neck of the woods until later in August when the silvers start coming in. We've had 2 piles that hit obstructions during pile driving. One, it turned out to be the bubble curtain, which is a piling around the pilings being driven that hung up on something. We cooperated with the National Marine Fisheries Service Agency to allow us to finish that one without the bubble curtain, and we got to tip elevation within tolerance, which is great. We had a second obstruction that was on another piling that was about 100 feet deep. And these obstructions can be lots of things, but generally they're considered to be like a glacial erratic, a big boulder the glacier left behind years ago. We've ended up driving past it. We did get a little bit out of alignment, and that may require some adjustments to the pile cap. And just those kinds of things, when they happen, it's a change condition. It's not the contractor's fault, and it is accounted for in the specification. And so that's what, when we do have to exercise some of our change order authority. When the Assembly approved the contract, it came with 2.1 million in change order authority, and we've used about half of that so far. The majority being for marine mammal observation, extra sites where the whale watchers are looking for belugas. That was required by our permit after the bid came out, so we had to change for that. And all the rest of it is has used to date has been construction related things like adding some bolts in now instead of putting them in the later contract. Just some regular stuff that happens when you're actually building something. On phase 2, the bells and whistles, we tend to talk about it that way, which is the mooring and breasting dolphins, all the piling, the fuel piping coming off, mooring and breasting, dolphin piling, and then the fuel piping, the operations building, the hose tower, all the things that will make this a functional facility. That bid has been out on the street since May 14th. We had a site visit on Tuesday. We were really happy. We had good participation and attendance from potential prime and subcontractors, so we know it's getting a good look from the industry. And we have bid date opening scheduled for July 7th, and we're working hard to stay at that. We don't have any major questions or changes to the drawings that should delay it at this point. And if all that stays on schedule, then we should anticipate the Assembly would see it for approval at the meeting of July 28th. Any other questions?
Any questions from the members? Okay, I don't hear any. I just would note you said the piling is within tolerance, and that could be with intolerance or with tolerance. And so I presume you meant within the tolerances allowed.
Correct. It's very tolerant piling. No, it's okay. Yeah, tolerant piling done by civil engineers. No, all right, enough levity. Yes.
Great. So thank you. Now we're going to pivot slightly. It sounds like we've had the report on the port, but there are a couple of ongoing matters, and we have a conversation that's moving forward on the plan of finance for the port modernization going forward, and we also have a conversation about the kind of port, I forget exactly what we're calling it, the committee that reviews the projects made up by the stakeholders, the stakeholder group. And so with that, I'm going to let Meg lead with a question for you, Bill, on the advisory group.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering, Mr. Falsey, if you've had a chance or if there was any further work we could expect from you on looking at what the Matson had put forward with regards to the advisory group and what the administration had, if there was going to be any reconciliation there, or if you were just leaving those two opinions of what it may look like in the members' hands.
Yeah, through the chair to Assemblymember Zalatel, I think nothing further from us. So we opened the bidding with an initial pitch, and then we heard two options come back to us from the user group, the majority opinion and the minority opinion. We can live with either of them. I think it's ultimately a policy decision, as I said at this meeting last month, and ultimately the Assembly gets to make that call. So I think the ball is squarely in the Assembly's court now, and we'll stand by and see what you want that Assembly group, that advisory group or steering committee to look like.
So
Thank you.
Just for my part, I said last month that you and I would meet to have a stab at this process, and this last month has been a little bit hectic. So you and I ought to schedule that meeting today for sometime in the next week so we can advance that question and bring it back to the members through the committee. And then hopefully by next month, we'll have something ready for introduction and passage.
Sounds like a great plan.
All right, so it's you and me, and we're going to make that plan today. So, and plan of finance, Bill, any thoughts or input on that?
We've had some conversations with the two main affected users, Matson and Toad, about the plan of finance. I don't anticipate us issuing any kind of a revision of the plan of finance until the dust has settled a little bit more on the new design. So we had said, as we enter into the cargo side of things, we're going to be very cost aware moving forward, and that plan of finance now reflects our best understanding of the costs, but those costs will be refined as we have more specifics from the users on what they think their minimum requirements are. We're expecting to have that sharpened up in about 3 or 4 weeks, where you will remember that there was this long-standing question that came up in the earlier discussions about where the new berth face should be. Should it move out? Should it stay where it is? It's sensitively connected to how much of the northern extension, the failed federal project, you carve out. We're having real engineering-based substantive discussions in about 3 weeks with the users on that front. When that's resolved, I think that we'll be ready to have something that says this feels very close to what we should all agree is about to be built, and we would refresh the plan of finance at that point. I will also say on this point, I've asked the group to update the sort of timeline and the roadmap with new target dates for when we want various things to be accomplished, and so this would be part of that conversation, and we'll be happy to share that with you when that is ready, because I know that we all are very interested in keeping this moving forward and keeping it on track, and it would be good to have some moments where everyone has played all their cards, where we've heard from Tote and Matson, these are our minimum requirements, we have said our piece about what we think in response to those, and then we have updated the plan of finance as a result of that.
Any questions from the members? Okay, I don't hear any. Mr. Falsey, we are being confronted with a conversation from the two entities, the primary users, that have some different perspectives on the plan of finance as it's written. And there are probably some germane points on both sides. And so you mentioned that we have this plan of finance now, and you just intend to keep moving forward until at least next month when you have a finer point on the actual costs. The question I have is, are you addressing in some way or contemplating the difference of those opinions? I'm sure they've been brought to you. Have they been brought to you?
Yeah, we've had meetings with both Tote and Matson and have heard differing reactions to the current plan of finance. What I've suggested is, I think it would be helpful for everyone to provide some kind of written feedback so that it isn't just the administration and the two users having oral conversations, and then you're waiting for us to sort of give you our considered view, but we can all understand what everyone's viewpoint is together. So I don't know if the chair is still intending to solicit comments from the user group or from the community on the draft plan. That's certainly one approach, and then we could see what shows up. And the other is I've just encouraged the users themselves to send us some comments in writing, and if and when we receive those, we'd be happy to share them.
No. Okay.
I don't know if that was such a conversation-ending comment that I ruined the meeting, but that's where we're at, Mr. Chair.
Chris, are you on mute again?
I am not muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, it's a little bit staticky, but yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But what I suggested I intended to do was ask Desiree to remind me in case I forget, but I will send a communication to both Mattson and Tote requesting by this meeting next month, they submit their comments in writing on the plan of finance. And then we'll go from there. Ms. Kennedy, you're in the queue.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Constant. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have kind of a general question, and I don't know if this can even be answered right now, but I was just kind of curious as we're trying to get these finalized costs, what kind of things are actually impacting costs right now? And I was wondering if there's kind of been a shift. You know, a lot of times it's the cost of steel, it's the cost of fuel, but I'm just wondering in this age of COVID response, if some of the costs are shifting to even employee costs, higher employee costs. So anyway, I was just wondering if there was a general thought about kind of what's happening in the cost industry.
And this is bill policy through the chair to Assembly Member Kennedy. I think the main drivers of the cost changes that we have put in the plan of finance so far have been the lived experience of the petroleum cement terminal, and we will get a better sense of the actual rate of productivity, meaning how quickly you can actually drive piles. That's always been the big, that moves the needle as much as anything else. And that will become pretty clear by the end of this construction season. Meanwhile, the other big needle mover is exactly what we want to build. And so Tote has come back to us with some ideas that they are going to request less than had been in the mix before. That is what we're hoping to have greater clarity on by the time we are meeting again next month. We haven't seen a lot of changes from the full design that Mattson had previously requested. So remember, over time, the width of the platform got much bigger. There was a hatch laydown area. We moved to the larger cranes rather than the smaller cranes. We would like to see, after taking a fresh look at that, whether Mattson still feels like that is the theoretical minimum that they really need. As to your particular question of whether things have changed, I could ask Jeff Boole to give us maybe just some market commentary on that, whether we're seeing employee costs different or anticipate they'll be different, or the price of steel may have changed. My sense of that is that that's not the main driver right now, but I'll defer to Jeff, who is certainly closer to those issues than me.
Thanks, Bill. This is Jeff Boole. I'm the program manager for the PMC group. Yeah, it's a little bit early. We haven't seen a lot of bid information that would indicate that, say, the cost of steel is going to go up or go down. We really have had very little visibility on material changes in cost. One thing that we have noticed is I think there's been a lot of projects that were either permanently or long-term put on hold or short-term put on hold. We're seeing a lot of more interest in our project that's fully funded and an essential project. So that's good. So I think that the contractors see this project as a viable project, fully funded, and it's going to happen, and they're banking on that. So any increases to material costs, I think, are going to be negligible, and I think we're going to get good response. With that said, I would tell you that the current contractor, Pacific Pile and Marine, started out with this COVID experience, as we all have, with a lot of uncertainty some initial impacts to productivity in terms of the protocols, the social distancing and things like that, but they have quickly learned how to work productively without any impact. So right now we feel like Pacific Pilot Marines is demonstrating that we don't think that we're going to see much of a difference in construction pricing based on COVID per se.
And I'll say, so I was sort of thinking through the cargo terminals. Jeff just gave an answer that's for the second half of the petroleum cement terminal, but the Jeff answer is actually kind of better because the reminder is that we're going to know what the bids are on the next portion, the final portion of the petroleum cement terminal on July 7th. So then we'll know. We'll see if the contracting community has priced in COVID-related changes at that point.
Other questions? Okay, I'm not hearing any, so thank you for that update. We'll be continuing to come back to this through at least July as we see what happens. As you can all understand, there are things moving at the port. I was sad not to be able to demonstrate for you the audio of pilings being driven because that's what my house sounds like many days now. With that said, we'll move on to other business. I had put two items down to speak on in this category. One was the stormwater utility, but that managed to come up on its own.
Mr. Chair, this is Bill. I think we might be having a little bit of a connection difficulty with you. You, at least from where I'm sitting, we have heard you say that you wanted to add stormwater utility, which came on its own, and then we lost you.
I'm not sure what's going on with audio, but yeah, so the other topic, since we've already addressed the stormwater utility, is ML&P.
And Mr. Chair, this is Bill Falsey. If you'd like me to respond to that, I probably are overdue in having some official press release or communication on this topic. But what I can say publicly and for the group now is that everyone will recall that we had submitted a stipulation where all parties agreed to a municipal light and power sale to Chugach Electric on certain terms. And the response that we got from the Regulatory Commission of Alaska was that the deal was approved, but with conditions. And then we had a voluminous order that we were working through all those conditions to see if we were comfortable with them. And now at the other end of our review, I'm comfortable saying that I think the top line story is that we brought what we thought was a good deal to the RCA, and I think in the main, the RCA has made that deal a little bit better. So if you are looking for what were the changes that the RCA has said they would like to see, in the main, I think there are really two. The proposal that we had the two utilities merging together somewhat slowly over time in the sense that there would be different rate structures for the two utilities that slowly came together over the course of really decades. And the RCA said to do that more quickly. And the question for us was, did that really change the economic impact to ratepayers? And in the main, I think our conclusion is it didn't, that the RCA was able to achieve effectively the same outcome, but in a different form. So rather than having two different kind of rates, everyone's on the same rate, but for instance, the ML&P legacy customers, which the RCA now refers to as the Northern District customers of Chugach Electric, would have a special kind of credit in their bill. Either way, the punchline to ratepayers works out to roughly the same. The other is that the RCA said that the deal would only be approved if it contained a feature that the municipality could never have negotiated ourselves, which is the so-called tight power pooling agreement. That is not between ML&P and anyone else, but rather between Chugach Electric and Matanuska Electric Association. There had been discussions for some time about the utilities entering into a tight power pooling arrangement. So this is not a new topic to the utilities. But for public consumption, generally you can think of it as ignore the boundary lines and say if there is more power that is needed to be provided to customers in MEA or Chugach or ML&P territory, dispense the cheapest electron to them, whether it's coming from the north, the south, or the middle. And so that should be, in the main, another benefit to consumers. In the time since the RCA has issued its order, one of the things that we had to understand was well, how likely are Chugach and Matanuska Electric to be able to negotiate a tag power pool agreement? And what does this mean for the closing date for us? Because now this is totally out of our control. This is a conversation that other people are having that now affects our deal. What I'm happy to say is that we have not heard objections from any of the parties that signed on to the stipulation that any part of the RCA's order is unworkable or so objectionable as to cause anything other than acceptance of the RCA's conditional approval, and that Chugach has indicated to us that they think that achieving a power pool agreement is plausible and could happen quickly. So the punchline being that I think we are very comfortable with where we're at, that we still see the deal closing, and that we think a plausible timeline is that the deal may close in October. So we can, we're probably, as I say, overdue in formalizing some announcement along that front, but that's where I'm at now.
Thank you very much, Bill. Are there any questions from the members?
Yeah, I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Dunbar.
For Bill, and this is actually more of a Lance Wilbur question, so perhaps it should be held over until the next budget committee meeting. But if memory serves, we had anticipated a slightly earlier closing in our 2021 budget projection, and taking those revenues and putting them into the trust, and the trust starting to generate revenue for a half year or a little bit less this year. Is that because that has been delayed, has that had an impact on our 2021 budget projections?
Through the chair to Assemblymember Dunbar, the answer has got to be yes. I can't tell you as I stand or sit here now exactly what that is, but you're right. All of this is going to require us to come back to the Assembly to sort of clean up our budgets, and not just general government budget, but also the MLP budget. So you may recall that at first quarter budget revisions, we actually chopped the MLP budget in half, anticipating that it would be sold by July. And that if we're on an October timeline, then the half-year budget they received is probably not going to be workable. So sooner rather than later, I think that we are going to have to come back to you with something that chews up the MLP budget to our best understanding, and that explains what ramifications the new potential close date will have for the general government side. But you're right, that is a question somewhat better answered by Lance Wilbur, and I can make him aware of the Assembly's interest in that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Through the chair, this is Alex Lifka. I will say that the timing doesn't impact the budget from the standpoint of you approved a certain dividend distribution out of the MOA trust, and the timing of the sale is not going to impact that amount. And if it does, it's only by possibly $100,000 or $200,000 out of the $13.4 million that I believe is in the budget. So because it's closing in October as opposed to July, that number is not going to change.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that, Mr. Chair, then?
Go ahead.
Mr. Slipka. So I don't understand that, Mr. Slipka. Is that because we were anticipating taking the was the budget based on a dividend that was being paid out starting January 1st, or why is the effect so minimal when you have a 5-month delay? It seems pretty significant.
So I think we've shared many times that once we get final RCA approval, we are going to bring forward to the Assembly an amendment to the code in terms of how the dividend is calculated. Right now, the dividend is calculated over a trailing, we'll call it 20-quarter time period, where you would have 20 quarters of the old value and then 1 quarter with an additional $200+ million. And that would very much dampen the impact of the deposit. So what we're going to put forward to you is a proposal that would change that calculation. And that is why in the budget, you have the estimation that the dividend would go from $6.5 million last year to $13.4 million this year. It's because we are very much shortening the time period over which we calculate that average. And we are going to propose using the December 31 value of 171 million as one number, and the second number will be the value after the deposit of 220 odd million. So the decline in the market has had a modest impact on what the second total is going to be, but the number is still that we believe, based on your approval of our proposal, will still be roughly 13.2 to 13.3 million in terms of a dividend that will be paid out of the MOA trust into general government.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you. And we'll call that third quarter budget revisions for the purposes of making sure the utility has the funds it needs to operate. And with that, are there any other comments, other business that members need to add to this section to address?
Weddleton wants to clarify something.
Go ahead, Mr. Weddleton.
So, Alex, so I think the key point is that the amount that we would get from the trust fund is not based on the earnings as much as it is based on a percent of the value of the trust fund. So long as that trust fund hits roughly that high value at the end of the year, then we get that percent of it. So I think that addresses Forrest's points that we're missing earnings during the year, but we're not taking a percent of the earnings. We're taking a percent of the overall value of the trust fund. Is that correct?
You are correct.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Other questions from the members? Okay, then I will turn quickly to the next two items on the agenda. One would be legislative priorities, and the second would be budget items for 2021. I'm opening that conversation now. Anyone wish to add items to either staff or members of the assembly we should be focusing on? Hearing none, we'll just table those both at this time. Is there anyone from the audience who has requested to be heard? I'm hearing none. And any last comments before we adjourn this meeting early? Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Thank you, everybody.